The Galactic Empire's flagship hovered ominously above the scorched plains of Valora 5, its sheer size eclipsing the twin suns. The atmosphere crackled with tension as squads of alien soldiers marched through the barren landscape, their polished armor glinting in the harsh light. Among them, bound in restraints that shimmered with an alien blue hue, was a man. His broad shoulders bore the weight of chains, but his posture remained unbroken, his gaze calm and unwavering. Commander Zoreth, an 8-foot-tall Zoran with crimson-scaled skin and eyes like molten gold, observed his prisoner from the platform of a hovering transport. His species prided itself on dominance and strength, and yet, as he stared down at the captured human, there was an edge of confusion in his expression. The man had been found alone, seemingly unarmed, on the outskirts of the Empire's most classified outpost. The fact that he had managed to incapacitate 6 guards before being subdued was troubling enough. What perplexed Zoreth more was the prisoner's silence. "State your name, human," Zoreth commanded, his voice resonating like a drumbeat. The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" Zoreth bristled at the casual defiance. "It matters to your survival. Speak, or I will strip the answers from your mind." The human smirked faintly, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to spark irritation in the Zoran commander. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked over the transport's controls, the soldiers' stances, and the faint shimmer of the force field encasing them. To the untrained eye, he appeared indifferent. To Zoreth, the look carried the subtle weight of a predator gauging its prey. The transport's engines roared as it ascended toward the dreadnought's hangar bay. Inside, the human was marched through sterile corridors lined with metallic walls that hummed faintly with energy. The soldiers around him moved with the precision of clockwork, their weapons trained on his every movement. Yet, despite their vigilance, an air of unease clung to them. They had heard the rumors. The 6 elite guards reduced to groaning heaps in less than 60 seconds. The prisoner, though human, had an aura that set their instincts on edge. Zoreth escorted the man to the interrogation chamber personally, his pride refusing to delegate this task to subordinates. The room was a stark contrast to the dreadnought's sleek corridors, a cold, windowless cube of black metal illuminated by a single beam of harsh, white light. At its center was a chair with restraints far too advanced for someone like him, or so they thought. The human was pushed into the chair, the restraints locking around his wrists and ankles with a metallic hiss. Zoreth circled him slowly, his golden eyes studying every detail, from the faint scars on the man's forearms to the deliberate stillness of his breathing. There was something unsettling about him. Humans were supposed to be soft, fragile creatures, yet this one radiated an unshakable confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I'll ask again," Zoreth said, his voice dropping an octave. "Who are you?" The man leaned back as much as the restraints allowed, his gaze unwavering. "You've got my name listed somewhere in your files. Let's not waste time." A muscle twitched in Zoreth's jaw. "Your arrogance is misplaced. You're in the heart of the Galactic Empire's most secure vessel. There's no escape, no reinforcements coming for you. Whatever secrets you're hiding, we'll extract them." The human's smirk widened, but his tone remained calm. "You think secrets are my greatest weapon?" Zoreth slammed a clawed hand onto the interrogation console, activating a series of holographic displays that flickered with data. "Your defiance will cost you. Humans have a tendency to break under pressure." As a low-frequency hum filled the room, the human closed his eyes briefly, as if steeling himself. The machine probing his neural pathways was designed to dismantle even the most disciplined minds. Yet as the seconds dragged on, Zoreth noticed something peculiar. The human wasn't reacting as expected. No gasps of pain, no twitching muscles, not even a flicker of discomfort. The man opened his eyes slowly, meeting Zoreth's glare with a look so calm it bordered on dismissive. "Is this supposed to hurt?" "Feels like a cheap massage chair." Zoratha's claws curled into fists. Enough games. What were you doing near our outpost? For the first time, the man's expression shifted, but not in the way Zorath had hoped. The smirk faded, replaced by a chilling neutrality. You really have no idea what you've stepped into, do you? Before Zorath could respond, a faint tremor rippled through the dreadnought, so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less attuned to their surroundings. But the human's eyes narrowed, and for a fleeting moment, a shadow of satisfaction crossed his face. Zorath straightened, his instincts flaring. What is this? What did you do? The man's voice was low, almost amused. You think I came here alone? You think I didn't plan for this? Another tremor, this one more pronounced, rattled the chamber. Alarms began to wail in the distance, and Zoratha's communicator crackled to life, with frantic voices. Commander, there's been a breach. Unknown forces have infiltrated the hangar. Silence, Zorath barked, but his attention snapped back to the prisoner, whose calm demeanor had shifted into something more primal, more dangerous. You've underestimated humanity, the man said, his voice like steel. That's your first mistake. The second was bringing me here. The lights flickered, and for the first time, Zorath felt the faint prick of fear. This human, this seemingly insignificant creature, had become the epicenter of chaos. And as the dreadnought shuddered again, the realization dawned on him. They had captured not a helpless primitive, but a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The blaring alarms resonated through the massive corridors of the dreadnought as red warning lights pulsed in unison. The air was thick with tension, and soldiers barked frantic orders over the comms. The once sterile, invulnerable heart of the Galactic Empire was now a fractured hive of panic. At the center of it all, the human prisoner, who had been underestimated by his captors, was no longer a passive figure bound by chains. The chair restraints hissed open with a sharp metallic sound, and the Navy SEAL moved with precision. He had timed it perfectly. The moment the Zoran guards relaxed their vigilance, assuming the restraints would hold a weak human. With a sudden twist, he shifted his weight, using the release mechanism of the chair to push himself upward, catching one of the guards off balance. A single, precise strike with his elbow sent the alien crashing into the wall, his plasma rifle clattering to the floor. The second guard reacted, but not fast enough. The SEAL dropped low, sweeping the alien's legs with a calculated strike, sending him tumbling. Before the Zoran could recover, the SEAL had already claimed the fallen rifle and fired a single, calculated shot. The energy bolt disabled the locking mechanism on the chamber door. He didn't kill them, he wouldn't waste the ammunition or the time. But incapacitation was always his first instinct when the mission called for it. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the labyrinth of corridors stretching before him. The SEAL moved like a shadow, his steps silent, his eyes scanning every detail. He'd already memorized the layout of the dreadnought from the brief glimpses he'd caught during his march to the interrogation chamber. The ship was massive, but its design was predictable. Efficiency often bred repetition in structures like these. He only needed to exploit the right vulnerabilities. Turning a corner, he pressed his back against the wall and peered into a wide corridor bathed in flickering red light. A patrol of 4 alien soldiers marched briskly, their boots clanking rhythmically against the metallic floor. He studied their movements, noting the slight lag in their formation and the blind spots in their line of sight. Timing was everything. The SEAL reached for a piece of debris, a small shard of metal that had likely been dislodged during the tremors rocking the ship. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it skittering across the floor, the sound echoing down the opposite end of the corridor. The soldiers paused, their weapons raised, as 2 of them moved to investigate. That was the moment he needed. In a blur of motion, the SEAL struck. The first soldier never saw him coming. A swift strike to the back of the neck dropped the alien silently. The second soldier turned too late, only to find himself pulled into the shadows, a powerful chokehold rendering him unconscious in seconds. The remaining two were too far down the corridor to notice anything was amiss. He retrieved a comm device from one of the fallen soldiers and clipped it to his belt. It wasn't about listening, and it was about controlling the flow of information. Every communication they sent would give away their position, their strategy. He could use it against them. The dreadnought shuddered again, a deep rumble reverberating through its hull. The SEAL allowed himself a faint smirk. Whatever reinforcements his team had sent were doing their job. The distraction was buying him precious time. But he wasn't relying on them to save him. Navy SEALs didn't wait for rescue. They became their own salvation. Navigating through the winding corridors, he encountered resistance. Each encounter was a testament to his training. Close-quarters combat against species twice his size was no different than the countless simulations he'd endured. Precision strikes, leveraging their overconfidence, and using their environment against them. It was second nature to him. The alien soldiers, despite their superior technology, were ill-prepared for an opponent who turned every corner into an ambush. He reached a junction where the corridors branched off into several directions. Pulling up the map he'd committed to memory, he identified the path to the ship's reactor core. A grin tugged at the corner of his lips. The Empire had made a critical error in assuming he was simply trying to escape. They didn't realize he intended to cripple them from within. The corridor to the reactor was heavily guarded, as he expected. He crouched behind a maintenance panel, observing the guards' movements. They were disciplined, their rifles held steady, their eyes scanning for threats. Good. Discipline often bred predictability. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small fragment of circuitry he'd taken from the interrogation chair. With a few quick adjustments, he fashioned a crude but effective distraction device. He tossed it into the corridor, and the instant it hit the ground, it emitted a sharp burst of sparks and a high-pitched whine. The guards turned instinctively, their attention diverted. The SEAL moved. In seconds, he was behind the first guard, disarming him with a fluid motion and using the alien's own weapon to incapacitate the second. The remaining guards turned, but they hesitated. Hesitation born of confusion at the sheer audacity of the attack. That hesitation was their undoing. In less than a minute, the corridor was clear. The SEAL pressed forward, entering the reactor chamber. The hum of energy filled the air, and the room glowed with an eerie blue light. Alien engineers scrambled to respond to the alarms, but they froze when they saw him, their fear palpable. "Leave," he said simply, his voice calm but laced with authority. The engineers hesitated for only a moment before scattering. They weren't soldiers. They knew better than to stand in the way of a predator. Approaching the main console, the SEAL studied its controls. Alien technology was advanced, but it wasn't incomprehensible. He'd been trained to adapt, to improvise. His fingers danced over the controls, bypassing security protocols and initiating a controlled overload of the reactor systems. He didn't need to destroy the entire ship. Crippling its core systems would be enough. The alarms shifted tone, signaling the reactor's destabilization. The SEAL turned and retraced his steps, moving swiftly toward the escape pods. He'd already mapped their location, and by now, the chaos he'd sown had thrown the entire ship into disarray. As he reached the pod bay, a squad of soldiers blocked his path. Their leader stepped forward, a hulking alien clad in reinforced armor. "You've gone far enough, human. Surrender." The SEAL's expression didn't waver. "You should have taken my advice earlier." With a single, deliberate movement, he activated a device he'd rigged to the reactor's security system. The lights flickered, and the artificial gravity faltered for a split second. It was all the opening he needed. In the confusion, he surged forward, using the disorientation to incapacitate the squad one by one. Finally, he stepped into the escape pod and sealed the hatch. As the pod launched into the void, he glanced back at the dreadnought. The massive ship, once a symbol of the Empire's invulnerability, now teetered on the edge of disaster. He exhaled slowly, his mind already turning to the next step. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The escape pod hurtled through the void, its engines burning faint streaks against the vast, star-speckled backdrop. Inside, the SEAL sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the swirling chaos behind him. The dreadnought, once a towering monument to the Galactic Empire's power, was now a flickering, wounded behemoth. Explosions rippled along its surface as its systems buckled under the reactor overload he had initiated. Despite its size and technological superiority, the Empire's pride had proven no match for precision and ingenuity. The pod's automated navigation system chimed, pulling his attention back to the present. He leaned forward, scanning the data on the display. The coordinates were correct. His team's extraction point lay just ahead, near the shadow of a barren moon orbiting the gas giant Clither. Relief was fleeting. He knew this wasn't a victory. It was merely a delay. The Empire didn't forget, and it never forgave. Moments later, the pod's sensors blared a warning. He glanced at the screen. A formation of Imperial fighters had broken off from the dreadnought and was closing in fast. Their sleek, predatory shapes sliced through the void with unnerving speed. The SEAL's jaw tightened. He'd expected pursuit, but not this quickly. The pod's maneuvering thrusters struggled to evade the incoming fighters, but the small vessel wasn't designed for combat. Plasma bolts streaked past, one grazing the hull and sending a shudder through the pod. The SEAL scanned the controls, calculating his options. There was no point in trying to outrun them. He'd never make it to the extraction point. Instead, he keyed in a new set of coordinates, ones that would take him dangerously close to the moon's atmosphere. The pod plunged toward the moon, its hull glowing red from the friction of atmospheric entry. The fighters hesitated, unwilling to risk their own crafts in the unstable conditions. For a moment, it seemed he might slip away, but the SEAL knew better than to rely on hope. As the pod streaked through the upper atmosphere, alarms blared again, this time for something far worse. The strain of the descent was overwhelming the pod's structural integrity. He gritted his teeth, gripping the controls tightly. If the pod failed now, the Empire wouldn't need to kill him. Gravity would do the job for them. With a deafening crack, the pod's left stabilizer broke apart, sending the craft spiraling uncontrollably. The SEAL's training kicked in, his mind razor-sharp despite the chaos. He engaged the emergency systems, deploying the last of the stabilizing thrusters to slow the descent. It wasn't enough to make a smooth landing, but it might keep him alive. The pod slammed into the moon's rocky surface, skidding across the barren terrain before coming to a jarring halt. Inside, the SEAL took a moment to assess. Blood trickled from a gash above his eyebrow, and his ribs ached with every breath, but he was alive. That was enough. He pushed open the emergency hatch, the harsh, cold air of the moon biting at his skin. Grabbing a survival kit from the pod, he scanned the horizon. The landscape was desolate, a mix of jagged rocks and endless craters bathed in pale light from the gas giant looming above. There was no sign of the fighters. They had either lost track of him or decided he wasn't worth the effort. For now, he pulled out a beacon from the survival kit, tuning it to the frequency his team would be monitoring. With a flick of a switch, the device hummed to life, emitting a faint, encoded signal that would guide his extraction team to his location. Then he waited. The hours dragged on, each second testing his patience and resolve. The SEAL was no stranger to solitude or the creeping unease of waiting in hostile territory. But the moon's silence was oppressive. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, though logic told him it was unlikely. The Empire had bigger concerns, like stabilizing their crippled dreadnought. Still, he kept his rifle close, his eyes scanning the horizon for any movement. As the faint hum of an approaching craft reached his ears, the SEAL stood, his posture tense. The silhouette of a dropship emerged over the horizon, its engines kicking up clouds of dust as it descended. Relief washed over him as he recognized the markings, a human strike team. The hatch opened, and a squad of armored soldiers emerged, their rifles sweeping the area before signaling it was clear. Their leader, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached him. "Captain Blake," she said, her voice crisp. "We've been tracking your signal. Extraction's ready." Blake nodded, his face unreadable. "Status on the dreadnought." "Disabled but not destroyed," she replied. "Your work bought us time. High Command is already planning follow-up strikes." "You've made the Empire bleed, Captain." Blake's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "They'll heal fast. We need to hit harder next time." The squad ushered him into the dropship, and within minutes they were airborne, leaving the barren moon behind. Inside, Blake debriefed the team on everything he'd seen: the layout of the dreadnought, the weaknesses he'd exploited, the psychology of the Zoran commander who had underestimated him. Every detail would be used to turn the tide in humanity's favor. As the dropship docked with a stealth carrier on the edge of the system, Blake stepped into the command center, his presence commanding the room. Holographic displays projected battle reports, fleet movements, and intercepted Imperial transmissions. Humanity was still outnumbered and outgunned, but Blake saw the glimmers of opportunity among the chaos. An admiral approached him, her expression a mix of respect and determination. "You've done more than we could have hoped, Captain. The Empire is reeling." Blake met her gaze, his voice calm but unyielding. "Reeling isn't enough. We need to break them. Permanently." As the carrier prepared for its next mission, Blake stood at the observation deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed humanity was weak, insignificant. But now they would learn the truth. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win.